start by saying thank you to Chris and Cheyenne for putting on this event. It's amazing. I just most recently got into like the Bitcoin space inside the community, but I've been a 10-year-long Bitcoiner. So yeah, thank you all for turning out. Thank you to the volunteers, the speakers. It's a great, wholesome event. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Yeah, so obviously, we're going to be talking about inflation, deflation, and how Bitcoin specifically wins in a system where two forces that are pushing in opposite directions, and there's a lot of emergent areas in technology that are influencing both inflation and deflation currently. So we'll start with that. But first, I'll plug out my companies, I suppose. So yeah, so I'm CEO and managing partner of Sovereign Bay Advisors, which is an investment management company. Also, most recently, the more important company here is the Bitcoin Scholarship Foundation. We'll be talking about this at the end, but this is something very near and dear to my heart, and it's a new nonprofit that we're going to be starting this year. So aside from that, we also have the Midwest Bitcoin Summit, which we'll be hosting in 2026 in September in Columbus, Ohio. So look forward to that. We're finalizing some details there, but yeah, we'll have more on that on social media soon. So initially, I just wanted to talk about pricing and cost. So there's two. If you've talked to somebody from like an economics background, you're going to talk about supply, demand, that kind of thing. But I want to distill it even further into a more first principles approach. And if you boil down the cost of everything, services and goods, everything in between, raw materials, it boils down to two things. It is time and human labor, right? Or sorry, excuse me, time and energy, raw energy. I'm riffing right now, I'm gonna look behind me this whole time. So essentially, if you look at what is happening in the world in the last 100 years, we've had a technological revolution inside the manufacturing space, which has allowed us to be more efficient in the production of goods. The output of production per unit energy has exponentially increased over time. This is a deflationary force. And then the human element as well. We need less and less labor, the human aspect of producing something or even providing a service. But then there's like a third characteristic, which is more of an abstract form of cost, right? And it's the debasement of money, and it's currency, right? So a lot of people have already talked about today inflation. That is the core fundamental thing that Bitcoin solves. One of the many things that Bitcoin solves is the debasement of an unpegged currency, right? But at the end of the day, I don't want to be too harsh on currencies in general because I think it's a very beautiful concept that has allowed humans to flourish over time. As you look into the history of money, money was originally a social contract between one another. It's still part of that, right? In your own community, if you ask your neighbor for a cup of flour and he or she gives it to you, you know internally that they did you a favor, and when they come to your house and ask for something that's small, you reciprocate because it's part of the social construct of society. That's like the original form of money. It's just transactions of IOUs of services and goods, right? And then we moved into commodity money, and then we moved into metal coinage, and then ultimately paper IOUs for those metal coinage, and then ultimately depegging against the metal-backed, dollars or notes, and then move toward a fiat system, which is now fundamentally removed from physical reality, right? And that's the underlying issue here. How many people have looked at the U.S. national debt? Quite a few. How many have never looked at it? That's great. Okay, awesome. So as it's been mentioned, there's $37 trillion in U.S. national debt. Roughly speaking, though, if you go back into the 60s and then you look at the compounding growth rate year over year for the last 60 years, it's about 8.5% year over year compounded for around 60 years, right? It's kind of crazy, and really basically you have a doubling of U.S. national debt every 8 years. So every 8 years for the last 60 years, we've doubled our debt. It's like fundamentally just a huge issue because the economy is not expanding. The actual productivity of the economy is not expanding as fast as the monetary base is, as well as the debt accumulated by the federal governments.
That can be canceled. Let's not get into that, though.
Yeah, so M2 money supply, again, I'm sure if you guys are looking at national debt, you probably looked at the M2 money supply. This is the US national M2 money supply. You can look at global M2 money supply, but again, this is like more just to highlight what is the rate of growth year over year for, again, roughly the last 60 years. And we're looking at 7% roughly. So again, it's just like every 10 years, M2 money supply doubles, which is crazy. Because if you actually look at productivity gains inside the economy globally, you're looking at a 2 to 4%, depending on the time frame, increase in productivity, right? So that is a deflationary force in the market, meaning prices should come down. The natural state of a free market is deflation. We should see prices come down if we are becoming more efficient at producing something or providing a service, right? But due to the fiat system and a monetary base that continues to expand, it's a counterforce. So just to highlight on inflation, we've kind of hammered this one thing. This is basically dead at this point, but obviously it's a dilution in purchasing power because of the expansion of the total number of units in supply. But the thing I want to highlight is inflation is a vector. And I'm sure if you guys listen to Michael Saylor, he says this quite often. I think it's a really important thing to note because inflation affects things differently depending on what you're evaluating, right? Whether it's housing, ribeyes, foreshadowing here, or any other good out there, right? Netflix subscription, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, there are some interesting, noteworthy things that I can talk about with deflation, where we watched rapid deflation in certain areas of goods or consumer goods that they just plummeted in price, regardless of like the actual monetary expansion. So I bring that up to highlight how powerful human innovation and this like never-ending pursuit of efficiency that we have innately inside us due to our ability to abstract think. So, the first key thing that most people is, on the top of their mind is housing, right? It's very difficult for my generation, the generations below me, to be able to afford the average house, right? Or the median house. Housing, again, we watch the monetary base expand at 7%, and that's an approximation. You can like look at different time frames and you can get different estimations of like the actual M2 money growth supply. But housing, on average, since again the 60s, has been about 5.5% year-over-year growth compounded, right? And most people, if you're in real estate, you understand that, right? It's like 4 or 5% appreciation in the value of a home. But that is what you're going up against if you are not a homeowner. Every single year, 5% or 5.5%, roughly, that asset goes up in value. But it's the same house. It's actually lesser quality of a house if it's a used house. So fundamentally, these things do not make sense, right? But there's just a relative scarcity aspect of, I guess, real estate that does drive its value higher. Something near and dear to my heart is ribeye steak. Ribeye is an interesting one because, I buy a lot of beef and I eat a lot of beef. I didn't know this and I prepared this for this presentation, but ribeyes have gone up on average, again, from the 60s, 4% year over year, compounded for the last 60 years. Not too bad, right? A little bit less than housing, but it's also something that can have productivity gains inside the market because we have better practices in raising cattle. Maybe the quality goes down, right? But there's aspects to how we can scale the production of meat. Housing is a bit more constrained. So on deflation, the key that I want to stress here is I'm very optimistic about the outlook of humanity. And I feel like maybe some of the sentiment today has been maybe optimistic with a huge emphasis on the negativity of the world. And there's a lot to be negative about, and there's a lot to be hopeful for. I'm very optimistic because at the core of my being is very engineering focused. I think humans are fantastic at innovation. I think we will continue to innovate for as long as we are human, and we will continue to build abundance. And that's what deflation at the end of the day really is to me. It is about the efficiency gains. It's about a downforce on price through abundance and through efficiency. And it's just this never-ending give back to the world output due to innovation from humans working harder to solve problems. We have not really felt the outcome of this because everything goes up in price due to monetary expansion. Everything around it should be cheaper. Everything. Besides Bitcoin. But everything should be extremely cheap. Why? Because we've gotten way more efficient at producing it. We use less labor, human labor. We use less raw energy to produce every single good and service. So why is everything going up? And it's ultimately due to the debasement of the currency. And to give you the clearest example of how powerful deflation is from an efficiency perspective, here's something that's very relatable to most people, which is the flat screen TV. So most of us are old enough to remember when there was no flat screen TVs, and then there were, and the cost was insane, right? Back in 1998, it was around like $15,000. Today, you can probably go to like Walmart and buy a cheap Chinese 42-inch flat screen TV for around $150, right? So you've had negative 13, or almost, negative 14, I rounded there, negative 14% year over year deflation compounded. That's massive, right? It's twice the actual monetary, debasement year over year. So it's kind of crazy. You can see the actual impacts of human innovation, human efficiency inside the manufacturing space, and just the dramatic drop in pricing. It's continued, right? It's a steep downward drop in pricing. So I think this will happen in a lot of different areas. I think the most important thing for me to talk about with deflation today, which is a double-edged sword, is the fact that we have AI, and I know there's a lot of opinions on AI, but to me, AI is going to change fundamentally the workforce. And I think there's a massive gain in efficiency and also a huge risk inside the job market for the future generations. I think the impacts of this will have abundance, and also abundance on the consumer side and abundance on the efficiency side of companies and corporations for business owners. But the danger is we are going to replace accountants, we're going to replace lawyers, we're going to replace the administrators, we're going to replace any kind of repetitious task that is not novel, that is not creative. And
like bankers?
Correct, yes. Even bankers. So with deflation, with abundance comes losses in other areas, but I mean, I'm also optimistic that we will create jobs in other areas that do not exist prior to these leaps forward in innovation. So it's not too negative. I think my point here is we will have, as a consumer, a better life because of such things like AI. More abundance to information, more abundance to agents performing menial tasks like doing our taxes, running the books for companies, giving you legal advice, giving you medical advice. I use this today almost every single day, and it's been a profoundly important tool in my life and in building companies, as well as just being a better person and living a healthier life. So the formatting got messed up here, but yeah, obviously we have touched on a lot of stuff here. So Bitcoin is obviously decentralized, right? It's not a single entity that controls it. It's divisible, right, as a currency should be. It's absolutely scarce, right? There's a lot of things like gold, which are relatively scarce. There's real estate, which is relatively scarce, but less scarce than gold. Gold has like an inflation rate over time between like, I don't know, anywhere between 1 and at the highest 4%, depending on where you look. And Bitcoin is underneath 1% inflation currently. It's a deflationary protocol because every single 210,000 blocks, we cut the issuance rate in half, right? So every 4 years, roughly speaking, we have a reduction in new Bitcoin production. And so it's a very powerful deflationary aspect of the issuance protocol with Bitcoin. But as everybody has also said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time and reiterate the same points, but Bitcoin is borderless, right? It doesn't require any government to give you permission. It doesn't require any intermediary to give you permission. You could, if you live in a bad country that is war-torn, you could have Bitcoin in your head. You have 12 or 24 seed words in your head. You can walk across the border naked and get out of a war-torn country and have all of your wealth preserved in this pristine collateral asset. That's invaluable for a lot of the places around the world that have just had endless wars, right? In America, we're very privileged. We don't think much about that, but that's an enormously powerful thing for a lot of people. It's immutable. Can't change it. It's programmatic. We can add on top of the base layer. We can add functionality to this. We can add privacy to this. We can add efficiency to it. But the base layer is fundamentally secure. That's the most important aspect about Bitcoin. Is it's secure. It is not going to change. It is crystallized in time. It is crystallized in a thermodynamic manner. It is the best form of money and entropy that we have ever created. And fiat is like, are you guys familiar with entropy?
Yeah.
Right. Everybody knows this word. It's kind of a, yeah. I'm sorry, excuse me for a second. Yeah. Yeah, when I cracked this beer open, there was a lot of gas that was dissolved inside the liquid, CO2, that as soon as I alleviated the pressure, it moves outside the canister of the beer and goes into a state of more disorder, right? Fiat's pretty similar to that.
What's it, there's like a title to a story or a book that was, what does entropy mean to me?
Black Swan.
I haven't read that book. But,
well, nuclear physics.
yeah, so my point is if you, if you're not familiar with entropy, here's a really practical example of it. Everybody has a home of some sort that they live in. If you don't clean your home, you go in the middle of the night, you're drunk, and you walk through your house, and there's a lot of stuff on the ground. You might trip and fall and have a really hard time getting around your home. And we know that energy and work is required in order to keep the house in an orderly state. This is like a practical representation of entropy, right? If there is not work and energy added to a system, it will move into a disorderly state. Same thing with money, right? And Bitcoin is like this anti-fragile, anti-entropy type of store of economic energy. It is the best form that we've ever created. Gold was the second best, but gold ultimately fails because it requires custodialship, and it becomes a centralized issue which requires trust, and humans are untrustable. So
there's some pretty big rocks in the asteroid belt with a lot of gold.
that is correct. Yeah.
But you got to get up there and get them.
Yes. Yeah. And again, it's relatively scarce. Gold is relatively scarce on Earth, not so scarce in the universe. Right. So there is no more than 21 million Bitcoin. And at the end of the day, it's transparent. So we can see everything on the blockchain. It's completely open source. You can vet the protocol if you want. You can look at the entire blockchain and see everything, even though it's synonymous. So these are very special characteristics. And where Bitcoin fits in is if you stop using fiat, if you start actually running on a Bitcoin standard in your life, or maybe just a partial Bitcoin standard, where you have half of your net worth inside an asset like Bitcoin, you get to actually acquire the benefits of deflation for the first time. There's been other cultures that have experienced this as well. We had standard coinage in like the Florentine era where there was a renaissance of flourishment because of the stability of a currency that did not change because there was no government intending to actually dilute the purity of the gold or coin clip or any of the other stupid stuff they have done over the years. This is where we have a renaissance on our hands. We are absolutely amazing at innovating. We will continue to create and produce and make things more efficient for the world. And Bitcoin stores that efficiency, it stores that economic energy better than anything out there. So this is not really financial advice to you, because I cannot give that to you, but in my opinion, if you want to store the world's benefit of efficiency, every single innovation, every single new product, new market, new industry, every single efficiency gain inside the manufacturing of everything, you hold in Bitcoin. If you hold in Bitcoin, you will acquire the deflationary forces of everything. And a good example is, I bought my house in Ohio in 2019, and I paid 46 Bitcoin, right? I didn't actually pay in Bitcoin, I paid in fiat, but that was the price of the house in 2019. I sold that house in 2023 for approximately 10 Bitcoin. I could buy that same house back today for about 2.8 Bitcoin, right? Why is my house getting cheaper in Bitcoin? Obviously, it's an emergent asset class, and it's appreciating in its value, and it's completely mispriced in the market right now. But that's the same point. If we had a totally Bitcoinized world, every single year you would get about a 2 to 4% increase in the purchasing power of your Bitcoin if everything was purely Bitcoinized. Because you're creating more value, and the value is a fixed supply of currency that has to be, that currency has to be divided into the sum of everything in the economy. So in a world where we move into a fully Bitcoinized ecosystem in a society, we benefit from the collective network effect of every human creating something more efficiently than our predecessors. It's a beautiful world. There's some complications in the credit side of things, but I think we'll have to figure that out as it comes. I guess where I want to leave the audience today is, maybe we're all questioning where are we at, what is the natural path of money and an adoption of money and like the different phases that money goes through. I wish we could know better what it was like when gold was adopted as a currency, because it's a very interesting period of time and it probably took thousands of years for that transition to occur. But what a crazy concept that maybe you didn't understand monetary theory, or maybe you just endured the various collapses of currencies, and eventually someone figured it out. Hey, if you just preserve the value, the purity of a coin, and you don't change it, life's pretty simple. You can kind of just move on with your life. You can store your life's work, your economic energy that you put out into the world, into a stable currency, right? And so I don't know what that looked like with gold, but we're watching it in real time today. So it's a very special time to be alive. I think it's very interesting. I think it's exciting. I'm very hopeful for this. I think it's our part. We have to do our part in order to make sure this succeeds, because there is no alternative. I know it seems kind of like this crazy, polarizing statement, but the fiat system will mathematically fail. No one's coming to save you, and no one's coming to save anyone else. And it's up to us to educate. It's up to us to protect ourselves, our families, our loved ones. I've been the crazy Bitcoin guy for 10 years, and I've watched the transition socially, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. People are much more receptive. Everybody, almost everybody knows, no matter what age, they know what Bitcoin, they know of Bitcoin, right? They may not know what it is, but they have heard of it. So there's a social fabric that is changing, and where we are today is the store value phase, right? Inside, these are the characteristics, but I like to look at them as a phase for money adoption. We are in the store value phase, right? Everybody talks about Bitcoin because it's going to be a great store of value. It's only worth $2 trillion market cap or whatever, and it's a $100 trillion market cap, or maybe it's worth half of everything, so it's a $450 to $500 trillion market cap potentially. Everybody's looking at it from that initial perspective of monetary gain, right? That's great, because that attracts everybody. It attracts the good, the bad. It's the greed element to a certain degree. And as you get into it, maybe the greed is what gets most people involved. But then you start to realize how special this thing is and how it's going to transform society. And so, something that I really appreciated today is the constant reminder that we need to use Bitcoin, we need to transact in Bitcoin. I think that's fundamentally important, because we need to add energy to a new system. And if all we do is store it for value, for savings, we don't fundamentally change society. So I appreciate those who have talked about this. I think that's really, really important. And so what that does is it ushers in the medium of exchange era, where it's known to be a good store of value, but the actual circular economies are actually transacting in Bitcoin. I think that's fundamentally important, because it's a learning curve. It's technically hard, and I think the user interfaces for applications need to come more in line with maybe some of the general populace, similar to just swiping a credit card. It just needs to work. Nobody cares how it actually works. There's a spectrum of people that want to know or not know a level of information. So after we move from a store of value into a medium of exchange, that's when the social construct really actually comes together. And that's the unit of account. That's where the social fabric of every single conscious person living in the economy relates and actually bases the value of everything in the unit of Bitcoin, right? And that comes much later. I cannot tell you how long this takes, but hopefully within my lifetime. And that's why I'm here. That's why I think all of you guys are here. We're just on the same mission. It can kind of seem religious. It can kind of seem, maybe for those who are not very well informed on the topic, cultish. So I try to do my best to not seem like a cult leader when I talk about this, but yeah. And the last thing I just wanted to talk about for a second, since I have the stage, is the Bitcoin Scholarship Foundation. This is something that we're doing. It's it's a nonprofit that we're starting. We're working with our attorneys to get this submitted so that we do get nonprofit exempt status. But what this is a nonprofit that is focused on taking charitable donations in fiat or Bitcoin, converting to Bitcoin, and then giving in a fiat amount, $500, but in Bitcoin, giving that to children who are from an underprivileged, impoverished community or household. I lived in Ohio, in Lima, Ohio, and I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard of Lima, Ohio. It's a pretty impoverished community, and as I lived there, I was at the YMCA every single night working out, and I just got to know all these kids. And as I sat in Ohio for 6 years wondering what the hell am I doing here, I also thought about how the hell do you fix these broken cities inside America, right? And I know the world has a lot more problems than just American cities, but I live here, this is my home, this is my country, I want to do right by the people that live here and try to help those that are in bad situations, because I have hopes to have kids, and I want my kids to have kids, and I want a better future for my home country, my home state, my home cities. And I was just thinking, you know, it boils down to two things. It's opportunity and education at the end of the day, right? And opportunity comes in different forms, but capital is a really good opportunity. And there was an idea that kind of just spurred in my head at the time, which was, what if we gave each kid $500 in Bitcoin? And we chose, like, you know, age groups 5 through maybe 14 or something like that. And then we time lock it until they're 25 years old. And so they get to watch this asset, which is emergent, which is volatile, which moves on like the liquidity cycles of, you know, global macro events. And they get to have a passive experience holding an asset, having skin in the game, but they can't emotionally react, right? And they could be a 5-year-old that experiences every bit of volatility that we have experienced on an asset that is crazy and emotional. And, well, Bitcoin's not emotional, humans are emotional, but, you know, my point is they get to have an experience as an investor in something and have a long-term investment, delayed gratification, and a long time preference. We can build this into the psychological state of kids. And, you know, through a charity, we can actually help those who are most in need. Of course, there's other programs involved in this, and it's a focus on financial literacy education, as well as a mentorship program. This is in the very early developments, but I intend to run with this as fast as I can. And I think it's going to be something that's, you know, going to change a lot of lives. Got 1 minute, so if there's any questions, go ahead. Yes?
How do we become part of it?
The Bitcoin Scholarship Foundation
Yeah, no.
as a donor, or
No,
or you want to get involved?
As an educator, I mean, how to get involved? How do
You'll take my contact today, and we'll be in discussions going forward. Yeah. So I'm working through the legal side of this for the IRS so that we don't get into any kind of quorums with them. But for the most part, the only thing that's tricky right now is that time lock feature. So that delayed, especially as they're an adult at 25 years old. So we'll have to work through that. It might get switched down to maybe like 18 years old or something like that. But other than that, we have every reasonable charitable cause that would give us the exempt status. But yeah, if you want to get involved, I would love to have that. If anybody else in the crowd wants to get involved with this, please take some time to come and talk to me after this, and you know, we'll swap contacts.
You didn't put a QR code up there, did you?
I did not. The only QR code I have is actually for the investment management entity, which if you guys are interested in a hedge fund, we can also talk about that. Yes.
What city do you plan on starting this in?
It's not a particular city, and because of the actual regulations around a nonprofit, we can't be selective in that, and it has to be not focused in that type of way. But I would love to start this in the Chicagoland areas. My wife, who just asked me that question, her father's from Inglewood, Chicago, which if you're from the area, you know it's a very bad neighborhood. And it's fallen apart over the last 50 years. And a good friend of mine, new friend of mine, Reggie Smith, is also from Inglewood, and this idea was kind of resurfaced recently over a dinner conversation. He's also from Inglewood, so if I had the choice, I would love to do this in Inglewood, Chicago. And then obviously circle back to Lima, Ohio, and anywhere else. But my goal ultimately is a million kids. I want to reach 1 million kids, give 1 million kids $500 in Bitcoin, time lock it to 25, and watch the implications ensue. Yeah.
So not trying. Do you think that, like, why $500, and do you expect there would be like a cost of living adjustment over time if you continue?
Yeah. Why 500? It's a completely arbitrary number, to be honest with you. I was thinking between like a 500 and 1,000. If you give a 5-year-old $500 in Bitcoin and you like extrapolate potentially where that might go,
Yeah, it's a college fund.
Yeah. I would estimate between $25,000 and $50,000, right, at the age of 25. So it gives them the opportunity at 25, where the prefrontal cortex is more formally like developed. Their decision making hopefully is better at that point. As we all know, we were young and dumb. But yeah, if you have $25,000 or $50,000, I mean that's a car, it's a down payment on a house, even with the adjusted inflation potentially.
Yeah.
You know, it's an opportunity to get out. In the worst case scenarios, those kids just spend it right back into that local economy, and you have a nice economic boom.
And so what does that $500 do for them in the near term? You know, like it seems like they
It's a
need
learning
assistance
lesson.
now.
So the $500 in the near term and the short term, depending on their age, is the experience of having skin in the game. So that a kid that has nothing can have $500, he can open up his smartphone and look at something in his phone and go, oh my God, it's up $100. Oh my God, it's down $200. And they do this for years, right? And they get to experience the volatility of a market. And you're giving a kid financial exposure to investments, right? And hopefully what's drawn from this, in conjunction with, sorry, I know we're out of time, but essentially the experience is the value of the short term. So, all right, if you guys have any other questions, you can talk to me after this.
Thank you so much. That's amazing.
That was well. Thanks.
We can both have a mic.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You're a programmer, so I'm kind of curious about programming.
Amazing. And also, are you guys doing the Midwest thing?
Yeah, make something that works. Run it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so just to touch on the other company, the Midwest Bitcoin Summit, that'll be in, we'll formally lock in the date, but it'll be likely September 23rd and 24th in Columbus, Ohio. This will be at the Greater Columbus Convention Center, so we're renting out 217,000 square feet in that entire area. It's going to be a large exhibit hall. There'll be a main stage, if you guys are familiar with the BTC Inc. type of like conferences will have a large main
Heard of
stage.
it.
Yeah, similar to the Nakamoto stage, as well as a smaller stage similar to like the enterprise stage. But yeah, we'll do two-tier system, so general attendance as well as VIP. So there's like a more luxurious experience if you want it, and also the general attendance. The focus here is like really getting into the city level and like ground level education and getting people at a larger event. As well as my partner Lenny, also, he has the OCHBS, the Ohio Cannabis Health and Business Summit. That'll be running in parallel, in tandem at the same time. So it'll also be a cannabis event, coexisting with Bitcoin, which there's a lot of overlaps there. So I think it'll be a good time.
Cool. Let's go.